Welcome to the Tao at Night. Tonight we are resting inside one of the most quietly astonishing moments in the whole of Taoist literature, and perhaps in the whole of human thinking about the self. Zhuangzi, the great philosopher whose writing gave the Tao Te Ching its most playful, most subversive counterpart, was sleeping one afternoon. And while he slept, he dreamed that he was a butterfly. Not that he thought about one. He was a butterfly, flying freely, drifting on the air, with no awareness whatsoever of being Zhuangzi. No philosopher, no identity, only wings and wind and the unthinking aliveness of a creature that does not carry its name with it wherever it goes. And then he woke, and there he was again, Zhuangzi, the man, the philosopher, the name that his life had been organized around. And he sat with a question that he did not try to answer. He simply held it. Was he a man who had just dreamed of being a butterfly? Or was he a butterfly now dreaming of being a man? Tonight does not ask you to solve this question. It only invites you to rest inside it, the way Zhuangzi did, without needing to know which one you are. The self that goes to sleep tonight, and the self that will wake tomorrow, and the self in the hours between. They may not be as separate or as fixed or as solid as they usually feel. And that is not a frightening thing. It is, in the Taoist understanding, a quietly liberating one. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are listening from, and whether you are a front, back, or side sleeper. There are no wrong answers here, only fellow travelers finding their way to rest. So wherever you are right now, let yourself settle in. There is nothing to figure out. There is nowhere else to be. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night. Let us begin. The butterfly dream is 2 sentences long. Zhuangzi did not make it longer. He did not explain it. He did not say what the dream meant, or what the correct philosophical interpretation was, or what the listener was supposed to do with the uncertainty it produced. He simply reported what happened. He dreamed he was a butterfly. He woke and was a man again, and he was not certain which was which. The teaching is the not knowing, not the resolution of it. The not knowing. In most wisdom traditions, the teaching is the answer, the thing you arrive at after the confusion, the clarity that the question eventually yields. In the Taoist tradition of Zhuangzi, the teaching is sometimes the question itself, held in a specific way, not as an urgent problem requiring solution, not as a riddle to be cracked, but as an invitation to rest in a quality of openness, the specific quality of a mind that can hold uncertainty without needing to resolve it into certainty. This is Wu Wei applied to the mind, not forcing the understanding, not pushing the thought toward a conclusion, letting the question live without requiring it to die into an answer. Tonight the question is, where exactly is the line between one thing and another, between waking and dreaming, between self and not self, between who you were this morning and who you are in this moment, between the person who will fall asleep tonight and the person who dreams? Zhuangzi sat with this, not to solve it, to see how it felt to hold it, and to discover that the not knowing, rested in completely, is not anxiety. It is something closer to freedom. There was once a young dervish who could not, in the deepest of his prayers, tell where the prayer ended and the praying began. He had been practicing for several years, practicing with genuine care, with the kind of consistency that only comes from genuine conviction that the practice matters. He was not going through the forms, he was trying to mean them. And on most days, this distinction was clear to him. There was the prayer, and there was himself offering the prayer. The two things, the content and the one who brought the content. But in the last several weeks, something had been happening in his deepest practice that he could not account for. In the stillest moments of the longest prayers, the distinction had been dissolving. He could not say exactly when it happened, only that he would look up at some point during the prayer and could not find the edge of it, could not locate the place where his attention stopped and the prayer itself began. He had been praying, genuinely, completely, and something about the praying had merged with the prayer in a way that left him without a clear boundary. He brought this to his teacher, an old woman of many decades of practice, a person who had a specific quality of settled amusement in her face that suggested she had heard many things and been surprised by very few. "I cannot find the edge," he said, "between myself and the prayer." She looked at him with the settled amusement. "And this troubles you?" she said. "It unsettles me," he said. "I am not sure who is praying." She was quiet for a long moment. "Tell me," she said, "on the days when the edge is clear, when you can say with certainty where you stop and the prayer begins, what is the quality of the prayer?" He thought. "Correct," he said, "the right words in the right order. Sincere, but at a slight distance." "At a distance," she repeated. "And on the days when the edge dissolves?" He thought more carefully. "Something else," he said. "Something more complete. Not me offering the prayer. Something more like being breathed by it." "Yes," she said. She said it with the specific quality of recognition. Not the recognition of someone who has been told something new, but of someone who is hearing the name of something they already knew. "That is not a problem," she said. "That is the prayer working." "But who is praying?" he asked. He asked it genuinely, not as a philosophical puzzle, as a real question that needed a real answer. She looked at him. "You are asking the wrong question," she said. "Not wrong as in stupid, wrong as in looking in the wrong direction." She paused. "The question of who is praying assumes that the praying is something done by someone to something else, the one who prays, and the prayer, and the one prayed to, three separate things." She looked at him steadily. "What is happening in the moments you are describing is the beginning of the collapse of those three into something that is harder to name, not the dissolution of yourself. You are still here, sitting with me, asking a sensible question, but the dissolution of the wall between yourself and what you are reaching towards." She paused. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is arrival." He sat with this. "What do I do when it happens?" he asked. "Let it happen," she said. "That is the entirety of the instruction. When the edge dissolves, when you cannot find the wall between yourself and the prayer, do not reach for the wall. Do not reassemble the distance. Simply continue in the dissolved state, as whatever you are when you are not separated from what you are reaching for." He returned to his practice. When the moments of dissolution came, he did not retreat from them. He continued, as she had said, in the specific strange freedom of being both the one who prays and the prayer itself, and somehow neither. And the not knowing of which he was did not feel like confusion. It felt, unexpectedly, like the prayer being more completely answered than he had known how to ask for. Sufi mystical teaching holds the concept of fana, annihilation, the dissolution of the individual self into the divine, as one of the most advanced stages of the path. But what the young dervish was experiencing is not the dramatic fana of the texts. It is something quieter and more ordinary, what the Sufi teachers call hayra, the sacred bewilderment, the quality of being in a condition you cannot categorize. Not confusion, which is anxious. Hayra, which is awed. The not knowing that arises when the ordinary categories of experience are no longer quite sufficient. Rumi's poetry returns again and again to this image of the edge dissolving, the moth and the flame, where the moth's burning is not the moth's death, but the moth's becoming. The boundary between the moth and the light was always somewhat artificial. The burning reveals what was underneath. In the Masnavi, Rumi writes about the reed flute's crying as the expression of its longing for the reed bed. But the crying and the longing are the same thing, and the instrument and the music are the same thing, and the musician and the melody are the same thing when the playing is deep enough. There is also in Sufi teaching the understanding of the heart as the organ that perceives what the intellect cannot hold. Specifically, the conditions in which opposites are simultaneously true, in which the boundary between one thing and another becomes permeable, in which the self can be simultaneously present and absent. The intellect says, "You are either the butterfly or the man." The heart says, "Perhaps in the deepest places, you are the question between them." Think about a moment when you could not find the edge of yourself. Not a frightening moment, a moment of genuine absorption, a piece of music that you were listening to and then, at some point, were not listening to so much as being in. A conversation that was going so well, was so genuinely meeting, that at some point the sense of there being two separate people in the conversation faded, and there was only the meeting itself. A task so completely engaged with that, the person doing the task and the doing of the task became, temporarily, one thing. These moments are not unusual. They are, in fact, the moments of greatest aliveness, the moments you tend to remember, the moments that feel most genuinely real. And they are characterized specifically by the softening of the ordinary sense of being a self that is separate from everything else. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of going deeply to sleep. The moment just at the edge of sleep, where the sense of being a particular person in a particular place begins to blur, and the thoughts that were so specifically yours a few minutes ago have become something more like weather passing through. You are still there in some sense, but the you that is there is not quite the same you that was making plans and reviewing the day. Something has softened. The edge has become permeable. You may have felt this yourself in the specific experience of a dream in which you were completely, unquestioningly someone else. Someone with a different name, a different life, a different set of concerns. And how complete the sense of being that person was while the dream lasted. and how odd it was on waking to reassemble the particular self that goes by your name, as if the self were more assembled than simply given, more constructed than simply found. Right now, in this breath, the edges are softening. You are still here, but the you that is here is looser than it was an hour ago, less insistent on its own specific outline. The butterfly and the man, in this moment, are only the question between them, and the question is not demanding an answer. It is simply open, resting, as open as a sleeping mind. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi wrote about transformation, the way one thing becomes another, and then another, in the great cycle of the Tao. The caterpillar becomes the butterfly, the living becomes the dead, the waking becomes the dreaming. He did not frame these transformations as losses. They were the natural movement of what things are, passing through their phases the way water passes from river to rain to ground to river again. The butterfly dream is a story about transformation from inside. Zhuangzi does not watch the transformation. He is the transformation. He is the butterfly completely. There is no residual Zhuangzi watching from behind the butterfly's eyes and noting that the experience is interesting. There is only the butterfly. And then, without a transition, he could report, there is only the man. The transformation passed through him entirely, on both sides, without leaving a seam. The Lakota tradition holds this understanding of transformation as something that happens completely or not at all. The vision seeker who enters the vision fully finds something the one who holds back cannot find. The partial entry is not a safer version of the complete entry. It is a different thing entirely, and it gives access to a different level of knowledge. This is the teaching that the butterfly dream offers the sleeper, the invitation to go into the night completely, not to monitor the sleep from a protected position inside the waking self, not to keep one part of you standing guard while the rest rests, to go completely, the way Zhuangzi became the butterfly completely, without remainder. There was once a young woman who went on a vision quest and could not, in the deepest of it, tell whether she was receiving the vision or had become it. She had prepared for many months. The preparation had been genuine. The fasting, the ceremony, the slow and careful readying of the self for something she could not predict and could not control. She had been told by her elders that the vision would come if the conditions were right and the self was genuinely open, and that the opening required a specific kind of willingness that was different from ordinary wanting. Not the willingness to receive something interesting, the willingness to be genuinely changed by whatever arrived. She went to the place. She sat, and for the first part of the sitting, the long, difficult human part, she was very much herself, aware of the hunger, aware of the cold and the heat, aware of her own thoughts cycling through the usual concerns in slightly altered form. She was there, waiting, with the full weight of her ordinary selfhood present and accounted for. And then something changed. She could not say when exactly. There was no moment she could point to, but at some point the sitting had become something else. Not a vision she was watching, something more complete than that. She was somewhere, someone, a quality of awareness that was looking out from behind eyes that were not hers, or that were hers in a way she had not previously understood herself to be. The story she had always been living from was not gone. It was as though it had been set down, gently, while she went somewhere that did not require it. She came back, or something came back, and she sat in the familiar place in the familiar body, and for a moment could not find the name that went with it. It arrived after a moment, her name, her story, her particular set of concerns. They settled back around her like a garment she had been wearing so long she had forgotten it was a garment. She went to an elder, a man who had been through the seeking and who understood it from the inside. "I cannot say which was more real," she told him, "the part where I was sitting here in this body waiting, or the part where I was not." He listened to her carefully. "What makes a thing real?" he asked. She thought. "It affects you," she said. "When it is over, you are not the same as you were." "And which part affected you more?" he said. She knew the answer immediately. "The part where I was not here," she said. "Then you know already which was more real," he said. He looked at her. "The one who went out was you. The one who came back is also you, but they are not quite the same you." He paused. "The vision quest does not change you the way a lesson changes you, adding something to what was already there. It changes you the way water changes a stone, not by addition, but by the long, patient movement through something that is more fundamental than the stone's surface." He paused again. "The you that could not find its name for a moment when it came back, that is the you that has been most genuinely yourself. The name is the garment. Underneath the garment is what the vision touched." She sat with this for a long time. "What do I do with the memory," she asked, "of not knowing which was which?" "You carry it," he said, "not as confusion, as knowledge. The knowledge that the boundary between you and everything else is not as solid as it usually feels. This is not a frightening thing to know. It is one of the most useful things a person can know." He looked at her steadily. "The next time something that matters asks you to go into it completely, the next time genuine presence is called for, and you feel the temptation to stay slightly outside, you will remember that you have been all the way in before, and come back, and the coming back did not undo the going." Lakota tradition holds the understanding that the human being exists on several planes simultaneously: the visible, material plane of the ordinary life, and the invisible plane of relation with spirit, ancestor, and the living powers of the natural world. The vision seeker who goes out to the hill and fasts and opens does not cross from one plane to another. They discover that both planes were always present. The vision is not a journey to somewhere else. It is the thinning of the ordinary layer enough to see what was always there. The concept of Vikasa Wakan, the sacred person, the person of genuine power, in Lakota tradition is specifically not the person who has the most experiences or the most impressive visions. It is the person whose self has become sufficiently permeable that the living reality of the other planes is available to them in ordinary life, not as a special state, as the ground of daily experience. The butterfly and the man, both at once, without confusion and without forgetting either. There is also in Lakota tradition the concept of the dream as a genuine source of knowledge, not a lesser version of waking knowledge, but a different and sometimes deeper kind. The elder who receives knowledge in the dream and acts on it is not being naive. They are working with a different epistemology, the understanding that the self, when its ordinary defenses soften, can receive what the defended self cannot. The dream is not the opposite of reality. It is a different window into it. Think about the experiences in your life that have been most completely real, where your sense of being a separate self watching the experience was replaced by a sense of simply being inside it. The love that was most completely itself when you stopped managing it and allowed it to move through you. The grief that was most genuinely metabolized when you stopped standing slightly outside it and let it be as large as it actually was. The joy that was most completely joy when you stopped observing the fact of your own happiness and simply were happy. In all of these, the more complete the entry, the more completely real the experience. The partial presence, the managed presence, the monitored presence, the presence that keeps one part of itself in reserve, is not a safer version of complete presence. It is a thinner version. It gives you less of the experience and protects you from less of it than you imagine. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of sleep that actually restores versus sleep that does not. The sleep that does not restore is often the sleep of the person who has not fully gone, whose attention is still managing something, still monitoring, still keeping a watch on something that seems to require it. The sleep that restores is the sleep of the person who has gone completely, who is not there anymore in the ordinary sense, who has for a few hours set down the name and the story and the garment and rested in whatever is underneath. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of waking from genuinely deep sleep. The kind that takes a moment to return from, where you had to reassemble the name and the situation and the day of the week, and how restored you felt in comparison to the nights when you never quite went all the way in. The depth of the going is the depth of the restoration. The butterfly has to be completely a butterfly, with no residual man, for the rest to be complete. Right now, in this breath, the invitation is to go completely, not to hold one part of yourself in reserve, not to monitor the going from a safe distance, to follow the breath into the dark, the way Zhuangzi followed the dream into the butterfly, all the way in, without remainder, without a watching, self-checking from the edge to make sure it is safe. It is safe. The going is safe. And the coming back, as certain as the morning, will be what the going makes possible. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi was not asking whether dreams are real. He was asking something more fundamental. Whether the framework we use to decide what is real, the waking perspective, the ordinary daylight assessment, is itself the final arbiter of reality. Maybe the waking state is simply one state among others, with its own perspective and its own access and its own blind spots. Maybe the dreaming state is another, with different access, seeing things the waking state cannot see. This is not mysticism for its own sake. It is a specific and practical question about the limits of any single vantage point. The man who is completely certain he is not a butterfly is using only one kind of knowing. The man who sits with the uncertainty, who holds the question without forcing an answer, has access to something the certain man does not. The Stoic tradition arrived at a parallel question from its own angle. What does it mean to know something? What is the standard of certainty we require before we call something real? The Stoics were very interested in the difference between clear perceptions and unclear ones, between what is genuinely given and what is constructed by the mind's tendency to fill in, to conclude, to insist on a definiteness that the raw experience does not necessarily have. Zhuangzi's uncertainty on waking is not failure of perception. It is accurate perception. He perceived something that most people, when they wake, do not stop to perceive, that the transition between dreaming and waking does not come with proof of which state is more fundamentally real. The waking self assumes it is the real one. Zhuangzi noticed that this assumption is exactly that, an assumption. There was once a student of philosophy who woke from a very vivid dream and found the fear in the dream still present in him. He had been practicing Stoic philosophy for some years, practicing it genuinely, in the sense of actually applying it to his daily experience rather than simply studying its arguments as a theoretical matter. He had developed a reliable capacity to observe his own emotional responses, to distinguish between what was within his control and what was not, to meet difficulty with equanimity. He considered himself, carefully and without pride, a reasonably practiced student. And then one morning he woke from a dream in which he had been a soldier, not fighting, but about to fight, in the full knowledge of what was coming. In the dream he had been deeply afraid. Not panic, a deep, physical, serious fear of the specific kind that comes when something genuinely dangerous is genuinely imminent. And when he woke, the fear was still in him, physically in him, heart still elevated, the body not yet certain it had not been that soldier. He went to his teacher with this, somewhat sheepishly, since he thought a practiced philosopher should not be troubled by the residue of a dream. His teacher looked at him without any particular sympathy or dismissal. "Tell me what happened," she said. He described the dream, the specific quality of the fear, the waking, the way the body had taken several minutes to release the certainty of the dream. "And it troubles you that you were afraid," she said. "It troubles me that I cannot easily tell the teacher and the student apart," he said. He meant, the part of me that knows the dream was only a dream, and the part of me that is still in it. She looked at him with something he recognized as genuine interest. "You are asking the right question," she said. He had expected her to reassure him that the dream was only a dream. She did not. "You are asking, what exactly is the boundary between the man who knew in the dream that he was about to face something terrible, and the man sitting here now who can see that the dream is over. She paused. Where is that boundary? Show it to me. He thought. The waking up, he said. Yes, she said, the waking, but what woke? Was it you stepping back into yourself, or was it a different you, replacing the one who was in the dream? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. Both feel true. Both are true, she said. This is what the experience is showing you. She leaned forward slightly. The Stoics are interested in what we can know and what we cannot. And one of the things we genuinely cannot know, not from the inside, not by direct perception, is whether the waking state has a special purchase on reality that the dreaming state does not. We assume it does, but assumption is not knowledge. She paused. The soldier who was afraid in the dream was you. His fear was your fear. His body in the dream was you. His fear was your fear. His body in the dream was your body. The knowing that it is over is also you. But the knowing did not erase the soldier. The soldier is still there in some sense. The residue in the body is his residue. She looked at him. Which one are you? He sat with the question. He did not answer it. This is the Stoic inquiry at its deepest, she said. Not the management of experience, the investigation of what experience is and who exactly is having it. She paused. The man who can hold this question, who can sit with the soldier and the philosopher simultaneously without demanding that one of them be not real, is the man who has a more accurate picture of his own nature than the man who says, I am only the philosopher. The dream was not real. She looked at him steadily. You are more than you think. And the fear was not a failure. It was a report from a part of you that knows what genuinely dangerous things feel like. The question is only whether you needed the reminder. Stoic philosophy holds the concept of phantasia cataleptique, the clear or grasping impression, the perception that is so distinct and accurate that it compels assent. This is the Stoic standard for genuine knowledge. Not all perceptions qualify, only the ones that are genuinely clear. And the Stoics were deeply interested in the edge cases, the perceptions that feel clear but are not, the conditions in which the ordinary reliability of perception breaks down. The dream is one of these edge cases. The Stoic philosopher Chrysippus argued that the quality of conviction that a dream produces, the sense that the dreamed experience is genuinely happening, is identical to the conviction produced by waking experience. From the inside, while it is happening, the dream is as clear as any perception. The clarity of the impression does not distinguish between waking and dreaming. The waking does. There is also in Stoic teaching the concept of epoche, suspension of judgment, the deliberate withholding of assent when the evidence is insufficient. Zhuangzi's holding of the question, his refusal to immediately conclude which state was real, is the Stoic epoche applied to the most fundamental question. He did not have sufficient evidence to prefer one state over the other, so he held the question. This was not failure. This was precisely correct epistemic behavior. Think about the experiences you have had that felt more real than ordinary life, and how you categorized them afterward. The dream that was so vivid, so emotionally complete, that waking from it felt like loss, as though you were being taken from something rather than returned to something. The moment of great joy or great grief that had a quality of aliveness your normal days rarely approach. The encounter that changed you so completely that the person you were before it feels like a different person. In all of these, the question of which experience was more real, the vivid dream or the ordinary day, the moment of great aliveness or the average Tuesday, is genuinely open. The average Tuesday has more of the usual markers of reality, the consistent sensory world, the persistent self, the continuity of memory. But the vivid dream and the moment of great aliveness often have something the average Tuesday lacks, the sense of genuine contact with something fundamental. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the experiences we remember. We do not remember the days that were exactly like other days. We remember the days when the edge softened, when something came through that the usual barriers did not block, when we were more permeable than usual, when we were briefly more the butterfly than the man. And these remembered moments have an authority in our lives that the ordinary days do not, precisely because they gave us access to something the ordinary days did not. Right now, in this breath, the ordinary markers of your identity, your name, your situation, your specific set of concerns are already softening. The self that is listening to these words is already a slightly different self from the one that started this evening. The edges are moving, not fixed, not rigid, alive in the way that living things are alive, always slightly changing, always slightly more than their description. The butterfly and the man, both of them in this very ordinary moment. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi used the butterfly dream to point at something he called qi hua, the transformation of things, the constant and thoroughgoing changefulness of all that exists. Nothing stays what it was. The caterpillar is the butterfly, is the egg, is the caterpillar again, in a cycle that does not have a preferred or more real phase. The self is the same, not a fixed thing with variations, but a continuous transformation that passes through what we call identity without being permanently any single version of it. This is not nihilism. It is something almost opposite. Nihilism says nothing is real. Zhuangzi is saying everything is real. The butterfly and the man are both real, both complete, both genuine expressions of what is, but neither is permanent, neither is the final truth, and the clinging to either one is the source of the specific suffering that comes from treating a flowing thing as though it were a fixed one. The Hindu tradition knows this teaching as Maya, the cosmic illusion, the tendency of the mind to take the flowing for the fixed, to mistake the constant transformation for a thing that stays. But Maya, in its deepest sense, is not saying the world is a lie. It is saying the world is a game of constant changing that the unexamining mind mistakes for a permanent reality. The examining mind, the mind that has learned to see the transformation, is not less engaged with the world. It is more freely engaged because it is not trying to hold what cannot be held. There was once a pilgrim who dreamed of being at the sacred mountain she had always hoped to visit, and could not, on waking, say whether the waking journey she had been planning was more real than the one she had taken in the dream. She had spent several years preparing for the pilgrimage. Not casually, the preparation had been a genuine spiritual undertaking, involving the study of the teachings associated with the mountain, the cultivation of the specific inner qualities the pilgrimage was traditionally meant to develop, and the material arrangements necessary for a long journey on foot. The preparation had been its own kind of journey, in the way that genuine preparation always is. And then one night, before the waking journey had begun, she dreamed she was there. She was on the mountain, specifically on the mountain, in the cold, thin air of the high altitude, with the particular quality of light that belongs to very high places, and the specific silence that is different from ordinary silence. She walked the pilgrimage route she had studied. She stopped at the places the texts said to stop. She felt, and this was what troubled her on waking, exactly what the pilgrims who had made the journey in their waking lives described feeling. Not a general spiritual feeling, but the specific quality they mentioned, the smallness of the self relative to something much larger, and the paradoxical comfort of that smallness. She woke with the mountain still in her. She came to a teacher of her tradition, a woman who had herself made the waking pilgrimage many times, and who had also, she later discovered, made it many more times in her dreaming. "I do not know which journey to trust," the pilgrim said. "The one I have been planning with my waking mind, or the one that arrived already while I was sleeping, and that felt entirely real while it was happening." The teacher listened. "Tell me what happened in the dream," she said. The pilgrim described it in detail. The air, the light, the silence, the feeling of the self becoming smaller and the something larger becoming more present. "And you arrived somewhere in the dream?" the teacher asked. "At the highest point," the pilgrim said. "The place the texts say is the center of the teaching." "And what was there?" the teacher asked. The pilgrim was quiet for a moment. "Silence," she said, "a silence that was full rather than empty." She paused, "and then I was awake." "I have been to the mountain many times in my waking life," the teacher said. "What you just described, the full silence at the highest point, is exactly what is there." She looked at the pilgrim. "Now, tell me, when you went in the dream, who went?" The pilgrim thought. "I don't know," she said. "Someone went. I was there, but the I that was there felt different from this one." She touched her chest. "Less specific, less personal." "Yes," the teacher said, "that is the interesting thing." She was quiet for a moment. "The waking pilgrimage, the one you have been planning, will bring this body to that mountain. The feet will touch the stones. The lungs will breathe the thin air. The self you call I will stand in the place the texts describe and feel what pilgrims feel." She paused. The dream pilgrimage brought a different aspect of you to the same place, less encumbered, less attached to the specific body and the specific story. Perhaps it arrived at something the waking pilgrimage will take longer to reach. because the waking self has more to set down before the silence can be genuinely heard. She looked at the pilgrim. Neither is the wrong pilgrimage. They are different journeys to the same place, taken by different aspects of you. Both are real. Both will have taught you something. The question of which one to trust is asking the wrong question. The question is what each one showed you that the other could not. The pilgrim made the waking journey the following year, and what she found at the highest point was the silence the teacher described, the full silence, the same silence as the dream. But she also found that she recognized it. Something in her had already been there, in the dream, and knew the silence when it arrived again. The waking journey and the dreaming journey had, between them, given her something that either alone could not have given. Hindu philosophy holds the concept of svapna, the dream state, as one of the 4 states of consciousness described in the Mandukya Upanishad: waking, dreaming, deep dreamless sleep, and the 4th state, turiya, which underlies and pervades all 3. The teaching is not that waking is real and dreaming is less real. It is that both waking and dreaming are states of the same underlying awareness, the awareness that knows it is dreaming, and the awareness that is present in dreamless sleep as the knowing of nothing. Turiya, the 4th, is not a state you reach by going beyond the other 3. It is what is always already present, underneath all 3, the awareness through which all 3 arise and in which all 3 are known. The pilgrim who want in her waking life are both expressions of the same underlying turiya, the same awareness taking different forms in different states. There is also in Hindu teaching the concept of vichara, self-inquiry, the direct investigation of who or what is aware, associated with the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. The question, who am I, in this tradition is not meant to produce an answer. It is meant to reveal the questioner. And the questioner, investigated to its root, turns out to be not the butterfly, not the man, but the awareness in which both butterfly and man arise, and within which the question of which is which can be peacefully held. Think about the versions of yourself that have been most genuinely yourself, and whether they were always the waking versions. The self that shows up in your dreams may not be less you than the self that navigates the day. It has access to different things, things the waking self's defenses tend to block, fears you haven't examined because the waking self has learned to manage them before they become visible, desires you haven't acknowledged because the waking self has learned to be more circumspect, understanding you haven't yet integrated because the waking self needs time to find a way to hold what the dreaming self already holds. The dream you, the self that appears in the dream without the name and the management and the practiced presentation, is not a less accurate version of you. It is a less armored version. And the less armored version often knows things the armored version has been carefully not knowing. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific experience of a dream that told you something true. Not a prophetic dream in any mystical sense, simply a dream that delivered information you already had but hadn't let yourself consciously hold. The relationship whose difficulty the dream dramatized before the waking self acknowledged it. The desire the dream expressed with a directness the waking self would never permit. Right now, in this breath, the management is loosening. The part of you that keeps track of what you are allowed to know, what is safe to feel, what is permitted to be true, is quieting with the rest of the day's machinery. And in the quieting, something else becomes available. Not a different you, a less edited you. The butterfly, perhaps, without the philosopher standing slightly outside the flying, taking notes. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. In the Taoist tradition, Zhuangzi's butterfly dream sits alongside his other great image of identity and transformation. The cook who has cut up so many oxen that he no longer thinks about what he is doing, whose knife finds the natural spaces between bone and sinew by something below thought, who has so completely become the work that the distinction between the cook and the cutting is no longer meaningful. He is the work is him. The line between subject and action, between person and practice, has dissolved. This is the highest expression of Wu Wei in practice, not the deliberate effort to be effortless, which is a contradiction, but the result of practice so complete and so genuine that the practitioner and the practice become one thing. The cook does not try to cut without effort. He has practiced so long, so deeply, that the trying is no longer there, because the one who was trying has become, for the duration of the cutting itself. The Buddhist tradition holds this in a very specific teaching about meditation, the point at which the meditator and the meditation can no longer be cleanly distinguished. Not the early stages, where there is clearly someone doing something, making effort, applying technique. The later stages, where the practice has become so genuinely the person that it moves the way the cook moves, not from deliberate intention, but from something more fundamental. The accumulated practice expressing itself through the practitioner in the way that water expresses itself through a naturally shaped channel. The butterfly, in its flying, is not trying to fly, it is flying. The man in his dreaming is not trying to be a butterfly, he is a butterfly. And in the deepest practice, the practitioner is not trying to be present, they are present. The Tao moves through them the way the cook's knife moves through the ox. There was once a monk who sat with many people in their dying, and could not, in the deepest of those sittings, tell whether the awareness he brought to the dying was his own, or was something moving through him from a source he could not name. He had been a monk for a long time. The dying had been part of his work for most of that time, not because he had sought it out specifically, but because he was present in the way that some people are genuinely present, and the presence had made him the person others called when the dying was happening, and someone who knew how to simply be there was needed. He was good at this, not good in the sense of being comfortable with death. No one is entirely comfortable with death, but good in the sense of being able to bring a specific quality of attention that the dying, and those who loved the dying, found genuinely useful. After many years of this, he found himself in a condition that confused him. He was in a sitting with someone who was dying, and he was, as he thought of it, present, fully present, the attention complete, nothing held back. And then something shifted. He could not say what shifted or when, but at some point the attention he was bringing was no longer something he was generating. It was something larger than him, possibly, moving through the specific instrument of his person in the specific situation of this particular dying. He described this afterward to a teacher of his tradition, an older monk who had been doing similar work for much longer. In the sitting, he said, I could no longer find the boundary between my attention and whatever I was attending to. The older monk was quiet. Tell me what the sitting felt like from the inside, he said. Empty, the younger monk said. He paused, looking for better words. Not empty as in absent, empty as in cleared, as if the usual sense of there being someone here bringing attention had been set aside, and what remained was only the attention itself, without an owner. And the quality of the attention in that state? The older monk asked. More complete, the younger monk said, less constructed. He paused again. Not better in the sense of more skilled, but more genuine, as if the skill was the obstacle, and without the skill, what remained was the thing the skill had been trying to approximate. The older monk nodded slowly. The meditation teaching says this, he said, that the practices are scaffolding. They serve the building, and when the building is built, they can be removed. The attention that remains when the scaffolding comes down is not the product of the scaffolding. It is what was always there, waiting for the construction to stop. He looked at the younger monk. What you experienced in that sitting is the meditation working, not the technique, the thing the technique was pointing at. He paused. The boundary between your attention and what it attended to dissolved because both were expressions of the same awareness. Your attention was not a beam of light going out from you toward the dying person. It was the opening of a space in which both of you were held, and the holding was not yours, and it was not hers, it was simply there. The younger monk sat with this for a long time. Is this what the butterfly dream is about? He asked. The older monk smiled. What do you think? He said. I think Zhuangzi woke up and could not find the wall, the younger monk said, between himself and what he had been. Yes, the older monk said, and he did not panic. He sat with the not finding, and discovered that a self that cannot find its own wall is not a self that has been lost. It is a self that has found out something true about its nature. Buddhist teaching holds the concept of anatta, not self, the absence of a fixed, permanent, independent self, as one of the three marks of existence. Not that the self does not exist in any sense, but that the self as we typically experience it, solid, separate, continuous, identical to itself across time, is a construction rather than a given. The experience of anatta is not the annihilation of experience. It is the recognition that the experience has been happening all along without requiring the fixed self that we assumed was doing the experiencing. The meditation that leads toward anatta is not a meditation that tries to destroy the self. It is a meditation that investigates the self, looks directly at the assumption of fixity, the assumption of separation, the assumption of continuity, and discovers that none of these hold up under direct examination. What remains when the assumptions dissolve is not nothing. It is the awareness that was there before the assumptions were added. There is also in Buddhist teaching the concept of rigpa in the Tibetan tradition, the natural state of awareness, the quality of wakefulness that is always already present, prior to both dreaming and waking, prior to any particular content. Zhuangzi's butterfly is a glimpse of rigpa in ordinary form, the awareness that remains when the specific identity, philosopher, name, story, has been set aside for the duration of the flying. Think about the moments in your experience when the one who is experiencing seemed to step back, or thin, or become temporarily less insistent on its own presence. The moments of deep absorption when you forgot to be yourself. The moments of great beauty, a landscape, a piece of music, a human face, when for a moment you stopped being the person looking at the beautiful thing and simply were in the presence of the beauty. The moments of genuine laughter when the managing self is briefly absent and something more spontaneous expresses itself in its place. In all of these, something happened that the fixed self model cannot quite account for. The self that was there before was still there after, but in the interval, something was different. The self was present without insisting on itself. The awareness continued without the architecture of personal identity being the most salient thing about it. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of play, genuine play, the play of a child or the play of an adult who has not forgotten how, where the question of who you are has been temporarily replaced by what you are doing, and the doing is so completely itself that the doer is absorbed into it. The butterfly flying, without noticing it, is a butterfly. Right now, in this breath, the tracking self is quieting. The part that knows your name and your situation and the specific weight of what tomorrow holds is releasing its grip, very gradually, with the rhythm of the breath. The butterfly does not know it is a butterfly. It is only flying, and in the flying, in the complete unmonitored aliveness of the dreaming mind, the rest that is deeper than rest becomes possible. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi wrote about the sage who moves through the world without leaving tracks, who acts without the accumulation of ego that turns most action into a record of the self's presence. This sage is not a ghost. They are fully there, but their there-ness does not insist on itself. It does not demand recognition. It does not leave the fingerprint of a self that needed to be seen doing something. The butterfly in the dream does not know it is Zhuangzi in disguise. It does not have a hidden layer of the philosopher's identity running underneath the flying. It is simply the butterfly, completely, without remainder. And this completeness, this absence of a watching self, a monitoring self, a self that knows it is being something, is precisely what makes the experience so alive that Zhuangzi wakes uncertain which life is the real one. The Hasidic tradition holds a parallel teaching in its understanding of bitul, self-nullification, the quality of the self that has become sufficiently small that the divine can express through it without obstruction. Not the destruction of the self, but the surrender of the self's insistence on being the most important thing in the room. The person of genuine bitul is not absent. They are, paradoxically, more present, more genuinely there, precisely because they are not spending their attention on managing the impression they are making. Tonight's teaching from the butterfly dream is this: the self that is most fully itself is the self that is not watching itself be itself. The butterfly that is most completely flying is the butterfly that is not monitoring the quality of its own flight. And the sleeper who sleeps most completely is the sleeper who has stopped observing their own sleeping. There was once a young man who dreamed of being the person he was most afraid to become, and woke uncertain whether the fear had been of the dream or of the recognition that the person in the dream was already, genuinely him. He had a specific self-understanding that he had carefully maintained for many years. He was thoughtful, cautious, deliberate, a person who did not act impulsively, who considered consequences, who prided himself on the quality of his reasoning. This self-understanding was not false, exactly. He was those things. But the careful maintenance of the self-understanding had also required a certain amount of not looking at the places where the caution was fear, where the deliberateness was avoidance, where the pride in his reasoning was resistance to anything that his reasoning could not contain. In the dream, he was someone who said what he genuinely thought without managing the words first, who went toward the difficult thing instead of analyzing it from a careful distance, who was, in short, the unmanaged version, less constructed, less positioned, less careful. And in the dream, this person he had to sit with this for a while after waking, not a worse version of him, a different version, and in some ways more alive. He brought this to a Rebbe of his tradition, a man of deep learning and considerable directness who had seen many young men in many stages of their self-construction. "I dreamed I was someone I have not been allowing myself to be," the young man said. The Rebbe listened. "And the someone you were in the dream, was he wicked?" the Rebbe asked. "No," the young man said. "That is what was surprising. He was less careful, less managed, less certain of where the edges were, but not wicked. Just ungoverned," the Rebbe said. "Just ungoverned," the young man agreed. "And the fear on waking," the Rebbe said, "was it fear of the ungoverned self, or fear of recognizing that the ungoverned self was genuinely you?" The young man was quiet for a long time. "The second one," he said. The Rebbe nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment. "The Bitul teaching says that the self we construct, the managed, careful, positioned self, is not the self that the divine recognizes," he said. "The divine recognizes the nitzots, the genuine spark, the actual person, the one who exists before the construction." He looked at the young man. Your dream showed you the spark without the construction, not the person without any self, a person with a genuine self, but without the management that has been covering it. He paused. The question the dream asks you is not whether to become the ungoverned person. It is whether the governed person you have built is genuinely yours, or whether it has been built to please someone or to avoid something. He looked at him steadily. Because the ritual that the teaching is actually asking for is not the nullification of the genuine self, it is the nullification of the constructed self, the one built out of fear, out of wanting to be seen in a certain way. What is left after that nullification is not nothing. It is the actual person, the nitsots. The young man sat with this for a very long time. He did not immediately become the ungoverned person in the dream. That was not the point. But he began, very carefully, to investigate the specific places where the governance was genuinely his, was the expression of who he actually was, and the places where it was a covering, a protection, a wall built to keep something out rather than to express something real. And in the investigating, the boundary between the man in the waking life and the man in the dream became a little less like a wall and a little more like a question he was still inside. Hasidic teaching holds the concept of bitul hayesh, the nullification of somethingness, the release of the self's insistence on its own separate and important existence, as a precondition for genuine devekut, the cleaving to the divine that is the Hasidic spiritual ideal. The self that insists on itself cannot cleave, because cleaving requires the permeability that self-insistence prevents. The butterfly cannot fly if part of its attention is on its own flying. The Baal Shem Tov taught that genuine prayer requires bitul, not the performance of humility, not the adoption of a lowly attitude, but the genuine release of the self's occupation with itself. The person of genuine bitul in prayer does not experience themselves as a self addressing a God. The boundary between the addressing and the addressed becomes, in the deepest bitul, permeable. This is the Hasidic version of Zhuangzi's butterfly, the one who prays so completely that the one who prays and the prayer and the one prayed to are no longer three separate things. There is also in Hasidic teaching the concept of avoda, service, the devotional work that is not performed for results, but simply as the expression of genuine relationship. The avoda practitioner does not serve in order to achieve a particular state. They serve because the serving is the relationship. And the deepest avoda, like the deepest cutting of the cook's knife, requires the practitioner to become the service, to let the performance of the service and the awareness of performing the service dissolve into simply serving. Think about the constructed parts of yourself, the managed versions, the positioned presentations, the carefully assembled identities that you maintain in different contexts. Not to judge them. They are not wrong. Most of them were built for genuine reasons, to be effective in a situation, to protect something that needed protecting, to meet the expectations of a community or a relationship in a way that enabled you to be part of it. The construction was not the problem. The forgetting that it is a construction, the mistaking of the garment for the self underneath it, is where the difficulty lives. The butterfly in the dream did not know it was wearing a garment. It was not a philosopher pretending to be a butterfly. It was a butterfly. The self that was constructed to navigate the ordinary world had been set down. And what remained, the awareness flying without the architecture, was not diminished by the absence of the architecture. It was freer. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of being in a context where the usual construction is not required. The person on holiday in a place where no one knows them. The moment in a long friendship where the performance has long since been abandoned and what remains is simply two people genuinely present to each other. The self in these contexts is less managed and more alive, less positioned and more genuinely there. Right now, in this breath, the managed self is setting down some of its architecture. Not all of it. It will reassemble in the morning as it should. But right now, in this softest part of the day, the garment is loosening. And what is underneath the garment? The awareness that was there before the construction, that will be there after, that is there right now behind all the names, is simply present, waiting, as it always has been, as it always will be. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi asked, "What is the line between being a man and being a butterfly?" This is a question about identity, but it is also, underneath that, a question about the nature of the moment. The moment of the dreaming was complete. The moment of the waking was complete. The question of which was real arises only when you stand outside both and try to compare them. Inside either one, there is no question. Inside the butterfly moment, there is only the flying. Inside the waking moment, there is only the morning. The uncertainty arises at the edge, in the comparison. This is the Zen teaching in miniature. The moment is always complete. The judgment about the moment, the question of whether this moment is good or bad, real or unreal, the right moment or the wrong one, is never in the moment. It is always a step removed, and the step removed is the step away from the full aliveness of the thing. The Zen tradition does not resolve the butterfly question. It does something more useful. It suggests that the question itself is the step removed, that the person who has fully become the butterfly is not asking whether they are the butterfly, that the person who is fully in the present moment is not asking whether the present moment is the right one. The question and the full presence are mutually exclusive. You can have one or the other, but not both at the same time. Tonight's invitation is the one the butterfly offered Zhuangzi briefly in the dream, to be so completely in this moment. This breath, this body, this specific dark and quiet, that the question of whether this is the right moment, the real moment, the better moment than some other moment, simply does not arise. There was once a student who could not catch the moment of falling asleep, and whose teacher showed her that the one who was looking could not find what it was looking for because it was looking with the same instrument that dissolved when sleep arrived. She had a very attentive mind. This was mostly an asset, but in certain situations, sleep being the most daily of them, the attentiveness created its own obstruction. She was interested in the moment of transition between waking and sleep, not anxiously, with genuine philosophical curiosity. What was happening at that specific edge? Where exactly did waking end and sleep begin? She had been trying for some months to observe the transition as it happened. She consistently failed. Not because she could not fall asleep, she slept. But the observation itself seemed to prevent the transition. When she was watching for the edge did not appear. She was awake, watching, and then, at some point she could not identify, she was asleep, and the watching had stopped. The very thing she was trying to observe was the thing the observing prevented. She brought this to a teacher, a Zen master who had been practicing for many decades and who had a specific quality of complete stillness in the face of any question, however strange. "I cannot catch the moment of falling asleep," she said. "When I am watching for it, it does not come. When I have stopped watching, I realize I am already on the other side." "Yes," the master said. "It is the watching that prevents it?" she asked. "The watcher," the master said. He corrected gently. "Not the watching, the watcher. The faculty that is trying to observe the transition is the faculty that disappears in the transition. It is trying to watch its own disappearance. This is why it cannot succeed." She sat with this. "What happens to the watcher?" she asked. "It dissolves," the master said simply. "Not the awareness continues, in the dreaming, in the deep sleep, but the awareness that is specifically organized around, I am the one who is watching. This organization dissolves. It cannot observe its own dissolving because the dissolving is precisely the end of its capacity to observe. So it cannot be seen," she said. "Not by the faculty that is doing the seeing, no," he said. He was quiet for a moment. This is the Zhuangzi teaching from a different angle. He woke from the butterfly dream and could not find the transition from one side to the other, could not find the moment of becoming the butterfly or the moment of becoming the man again, because the moment of transition is not available to the watcher. The watcher is one side or the other. The transition itself is the gap between watchers. He looked at her steadily. What this tells you is not that the transition is unknowable. It is that the knowing of it requires a different kind of knowing, not the observing mind looking outward at an event, something else, something that is present in the transition without being the observer of it. "What is that?" she asked. "The awareness before it becomes a watcher," he said. He said it simply, as though it were an ordinary thing. The awareness that is present in the dreaming without needing to be the dreamer. The awareness that is present in the deep sleep without needing to be the sleeper. The awareness that is present in the waking without needing to be the one who is awake. He paused. This is what does not dissolve in the transition. Only the specific organization dissolves. What it was organizing continues. She slept differently after this, not with less curiosity, with a different curiosity. She was no longer trying to catch the transition. She was resting in the awareness that would be there on both sides of it. And the resting was, in a way she had not expected, more complete than the watching had been. The butterfly, she understood now, did not watch itself become the butterfly. It was the butterfly. The transition happened to the watcher. The awareness simply continued. Zen teaching holds the question, what was your original face before your parents were born, as one of the classic koan, the unanswerable question that the intellectually grasping mind exhausts itself on before releasing. The original face is not a metaphor for a particular psychological state. It is pointing at the awareness that was present before the specific configuration of identity that we call a self was assembled. The awareness before the watcher, the consciousness before it became the observer of a particular person's experience. The Zen concept of mushin, no mind, the condition of the practitioner whose response arises directly from the situation without the mediation of the calculating, constructing, watching mind, is not a state of emptiness in the sense of blankness. It is the state of the butterfly, complete, immediate, unmonitored aliveness. The swordsman of Mushin does not think about the sword and then move it. The sword moves and the swordsman has moved it, and no watcher was present in the interval. There is also in Zen tradition the use of zazen, sitting meditation, not as a technique for achieving a particular state, but as the direct expression of what the practitioner already is at the level below the watcher. You do not sit in order to become enlightened. You sit as the expression of what is always already there. The butterfly does not practice flying in order to become a butterfly. It flies. The sitting is the flying. Think about the transitions in your day that you cannot observe in the act of their happening. The moment you stopped being angry and became something else. The moment a conversation turned from formal to genuinely warm, and neither person noticed the turning until it had already happened. The moment you understood something, not the moment of working it out, but the moment the understanding simply was there, where it had not been before. All of these transitions, all of the real ones, the genuine changes of state, happen in the gap between watchers. The watcher that was present before the transition is not the same watcher that is present after. And the transition itself is not available to either watcher. It is available only to something that does not have a stake in one side or the other. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific impossibility of falling asleep deliberately. You can lie down, you can close your eyes, you can breathe slowly and release the day. But the final step, the actual transition into sleep, cannot be done. It can only happen. The watcher cannot make it happen because the making would prevent the happening. The watcher has to stop watching for the transition to occur. And in the stopping of the watching, the transition is already underway. Right now, in this breath, the watching is quieting. Not forced. The forcing would be another kind of watching. Simply quieting, the way the room quiets after the conversation ends. The awareness is still here. The watcher is loosening. And in the loosening, in the specific quality of this breath, this dark, this specific and ordinary moment, the butterfly is already beginning to form. Not yet flying, but assembling quietly from what is already here. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, We will continue together. Zhuangzi's butterfly story ends without a conclusion because Zhuangzi understood that the conclusion would defeat the teaching. The moment you conclude which one is real, you have used the waking mind to adjudicate the waking mind's own claim. You have asked the judge to rule on the judge's own qualifications. The answer you get will, of course, favor the judge. The Celtic tradition holds a form of this in its understanding of the liminal, the threshold, the in-between place that is neither one thing nor another. The shoreline is not the sea or the land, but the place where both are present simultaneously. The dawn is not night or day, but the place where both are meeting. The threshold between waking and sleeping is not waking or sleeping, but the place where both are available, briefly, simultaneously. In Celtic cosmology, the liminal is not a place to be gotten through. It is a place of specific and irreplaceable possibility. The vision comes at the threshold, not in the secure center of either territory. The learning that cannot be learned in the comfortable place becomes available at the edge, and the edge requires a specific quality of attention, not the focused attention of the person pursuing a goal, but the open attention of the person who has allowed themselves to be in a place that does not resolve into certainty. Tonight we are at the threshold. The day is behind you. The deep sleep is ahead, and right now, for this specific period, you are at the shoreline, not quite in either territory, available to both, held in the specific and irreplaceable possibility of the liminal moment. The butterfly is not yet. The man is passing. At the threshold, something is possible that is possible nowhere else. There was once a storyteller who, deep in the telling of a very old story, lost the sense of telling it and found herself instead inside a quality she could not name, and could not afterwards say whether she had been the bard or the vessel through which the story arrived. She had been a keeper of the old stories for most of her adult life. The apprenticeship had been long and genuine, years of listening before the years of telling, years of holding the stories in memory and in practice before she was trusted to carry them into ceremony. She knew the stories intimately, not as a collection of remembered words, but as living things that she had a relationship with, that she knew in the way you know a person you have been in genuine relationship with for a very long time. There was one story in particular, one of the oldest, one she had told many times, that she had always related to somewhat differently from the others. When she told this one, something happened that did not happen with the others. The transition from the ordinary state of telling to a different state, a state she called, for lack of a better word, the inside, was quicker with this story and more complete. She would begin the telling, and within a relatively short time could feel the shift, the sense of the story going from something she was producing to something she was inside. On one particular evening, the shift was deeper than it had ever been. She was telling the story in ceremony, in a small gathering of people who knew the tradition and knew how to receive what was being given. And at some point in the telling, she could not say when, the story had passed entirely out of her control. She was no longer managing it. She was not aware of remembering the words. The words were arriving, and she was giving them voice, and the experience from the inside was completely unlike any experience of deliberate telling she had ever had. She could not say how much time passed. She did not know if her face was her face during it, or if some other quality was using her face. She did not know if what was being told was exactly the story as she had memorized it, or if something was moving through the memorized form into territory the memorized form had always been pointing at. When it was over, she sat very still for a long time. Afterward, an elder of her tradition, a woman who had been a storyteller herself and who understood what had happened from the inside, came to sit with her. "What was that?" the younger woman asked. She could not think of a more precise question. "That was the storytelling itself," the elder said. "Through you, as it was meant to." "Was I there?" the younger woman asked. "In one sense, no," the elder said. "The you that manages, that tracks the words, that is aware of the audience and adjusting to them, that you was set aside. Not gone, set aside." She paused. "In another sense, very much there. The story knows whose voice it arrives through. It chose yours for reasons that are in the story's nature and in yours. The setting aside of the managing self did not set aside you. It set aside the layer between you and the story." She looked at her. "This is what the old stories are for. They are not performances. They are not even communications exactly. They are openings. When they are fully told, they open a space that is not entirely in the ordinary world or in the story world, but at the edge of both. And something is available at that edge that is available nowhere else." She paused. "You were at the edge tonight. The butterfly, briefly, and the bard, and the question between them." Celtic storytelling tradition holds the understanding of the Fili, the poet-seer, the keeper of the living tradition, as someone whose role is not only to remember and transmit the stories, but to be a threshold through which the stories can arrive from the realm where they live into the world where they can be heard. The Fili is not the author of the stories. The stories pre-exist the Fili and will outlast them. The Fili's specific gift is the permeability, the capacity to be a threshold. The concept of imbas forosnai, inspired knowledge, the illuminated knowing that comes at the edge of waking and dreaming, is associated in Celtic tradition with the specifically liminal conditions, the threshold of sleep, the threshold of dawn, the threshold between worlds that Celtic cosmology held as always present for those with the openness to be at it. The inspired knowing does not come from deliberate effort. It comes from the specific quality of liminal receptivity. There is also in Celtic tradition the concept of thin places, the physical locations where the membrane between the ordinary world and the larger reality is thinner than elsewhere, where the interpenetration of worlds is more perceptible. Tonight, in the threshold between waking and dreaming, you are in a thin place, not a specific geography. The thin place is the condition of the threshold itself, the butterfly and the man, and the question between them, here in the dark at the edge of both. Think about the moments in your life when you were most genuinely creative, and whether the creativity came from you or through you. The ideas that arrived without being summoned, in the gap between two other things, in the shower, on a walk, at the precise edge of sleep. The solutions that appeared when you stopped trying to solve the problem and did something else. The words that came when you stopped trying to find the words and allowed the writing to find them. In all of these, the creativity that was most genuine, most alive, most surprising to you was not the product of deliberate construction. It was the product of a specific kind of openness. The managing self had stepped back, or been distracted, or was occupied with the shower or the walk. And in the gap, something arrived that the managing self could not have made. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the creative work done in the liminal moments, at the edge of sleep, at the edge of waking, in the spacious middle of an activity that requires the body without requiring the planning mind. These are the thin places in the ordinary day, the moments when the membrane is thinner and the stories can arrive. Right now, in this breath, you are in the thin place. The membrane between the waking self and everything else is at its thinnest. The managing self is the most quiet it will be all day, and in this specific and irreplaceable thinness, in this particular quality of the threshold, something is available to you that was not available this afternoon and will not be available tomorrow morning. The story is waiting to tell itself. The dream is waiting to be dreamed. The butterfly is already assembling at the edge of the known. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi understood the self not as a noun, but as a verb, not a thing that exists, but a process that happens continuously without arriving at a final form. The butterfly is one expression of the process. The man is another. The question of which is real mistakes, the process for a product, the river for the bank, the flowing for the fixed. The Ubuntu tradition holds this in a deeply communal form. The self as something that is constituted through relationship rather than existing prior to it. You are not a self who then enters into relationships. You become a self through the specific quality of your relationships, and the self changes as the relationships change, and what you are at the deepest level is not separable from who and what you are in relation to. This understanding of the relational self changes the butterfly question entirely. The butterfly Zhuangzi was in the dream is not a separate being from the man Zhuangzi who woke. They are two expressions of the same relational field, the same ongoing process of becoming, encountering different contexts and expressing different aspects of the same underlying pattern. The question is not which one is the real Zhuangzi. It is which aspects of Zhuangzi each context called forth. You, in this moment, are a particular expression of what you are, called forth by this specific context, this night, this quiet, this breath, this particular quality of rest. Tomorrow morning a different context will call forth a different expression. Both are genuinely you. Neither is the final you. The river is always itself, and never the same river. There was once a community member who dreamed of the ancestor and could not say, when she woke, whether she had been visited by the ancestor or had become, temporarily, the ancestor's knowing. She was a woman of middle years who had been a thoughtful member of her community for a long time, present in the ways that genuine community membership requires, present at the ceremonies, present in the difficulties, present with her specific quality of attention to the people around her. She was not a spiritual specialist. She was an ordinary person who took the spiritual life of her communities seriously, as ordinary people do. The dream came in an ordinary night, without preparation or ceremony. She had been thinking during the previous days about a difficulty in the community, a tension between two branches of the family that had been present for some time and that had not resolved despite the efforts of various people to address it. She had no particular solution. She was simply one of the people who cared about the difficulty and wished it were otherwise. In the dream, she was in a place that was not an ordinary place, not a place she could describe in geographical terms, but a place with a specific quality of presence, a heaviness of meaning that told her she was somewhere significant. And she was not alone. There was someone else, someone she recognized, though she could not have said how, as her great-grandmother's great-grandmother, a woman who had lived so long ago that no one in the community had any direct memory of her. The ancestor spoke to her, but what the ancestor said was less like words than like understanding, less like a message delivered from outside than like a knowing that arrived from very deep inside, as though the knowing had been there all along, but needed the presence of the ancestor to become audible. When she woke, she held the knowing carefully for a while before moving. It was specific. It was about the difficulty in the community. It was not a solution exactly, not a set of instructions. It was a quality of perspective that she had not had before the dream, and that she could not have derived from her own ordinary thinking. It felt, this was the part she could not account for, as though it had been there in the family's knowing for a very long time, waiting for someone who was in the right kind of listening. She brought this to an elder of the community, a man who was known for his experience with these matters. "I don't know if I was visited or if I became her briefly," she told him. It felt like both. He nodded, unsurprised. "In our understanding," he said, "the difference between those two things is smaller than it seems. The ancestor is not a separate being who travels from somewhere else to visit you in the dream. The ancestor's knowing, the specific quality of understanding accumulated through a life and preserved in the community's memory, this lives in us. It is part of what we are. The dream opened a channel between your present understanding and the deeper layer that the ancestor's knowing has always been part of." He paused. "You did not become her. You became more fully the part of yourself that has always carried her. The butterfly and the man, both genuinely present in the same being at the same moment." "And the knowing?" she asked. "Is it mine to act on?" "It came to you," he said. "What comes to you is yours to carry, not yours alone. What comes in the dreaming that is genuinely about the community belongs to the community. But you are the one who received it. The responsibility of the carrier is to carry it faithfully." He looked at her. "The ancestor did not come to you accidentally. You were asking the question that made you the right vessel. The butterfly knows how to be the butterfly that it is in the moment that it is it. Ubuntu philosophy holds the understanding that the self and the community are not separate things. The self is constituted by and through the community, and the community is the living expression of all its members' relational being. This means that the individual's dream is not only the individual's dream. The dreaming mind, freed from the particular concerns of the individual self, sometimes has access to the community's knowing. The accumulated wisdom and experience held not in any one person, but in the relational web of the community as a whole. The concept of amadlozi, the ancestors, the ones who have died but whose knowing persists in the community, in many African traditional cultures is not a metaphysical claim about personal survival after death. It is a practical claim about the persistence of knowing, that what a person learned through a genuine life of genuine engagement with genuine questions does not disappear when the person dies. It remains in various forms, accessible through the dreaming, through ceremony, through the specific conditions in which the living open themselves to the deeper layers of the community's accumulated knowing. There is also in Ubuntu tradition the understanding of Ubuntu itself, the quality of humanness, the being a person through others, as something that is not diminished but deepened by the removal of the ordinary self's insistence on its own individual boundaries. The dream state, in which the boundary between self and other softens, is one of the conditions in which Ubuntu becomes most directly perceptible. The self as inherently relational, always already more than its individual expression, always carrying what those before it accumulated. Think about the knowing in you that you did not personally acquire, the understanding that arrived without being learned in the sense of being deliberately studied, the specific quality of knowing how to be in a difficult situation that you had never been in before, and how it had a familiarity to it that your own limited experience could not account for. The particular form of patience or courage or care that does not quite match anything in your own personal history, but that arose when it was needed, as though it had been there all along. Some of this is the accumulated knowing of the people who raised you, expressed through you. Some of it is the accumulated knowing of the culture you grew up in, shaped into you before you were old enough to know you were being shaped. And some of it, the part that is hardest to account for, is older than any of that. The knowing of the people your people came from, preserved in the deep memory of the body, available in the conditions that allow it to surface. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of a response arising in you in a critical moment that felt less like something you produced than something you became the vehicle for. The words you found for someone who was suffering that you could not have planned. The quality of steadiness you brought to something frightening that you had not known you had. The sense of the right thing to do in a situation that your ordinary reasoning could not navigate, arriving as a clarity that came from somewhere below the reasoning. Right now, in this breath, you are connected to everything you have always been. The specific self you call by your name is the surface. below the surface, available in the dreaming, accessible in the liminal, present in the quiet that is growing now in the room, is the rest of what you are. The family's knowing, the community's accumulated wisdom, the long, patient, multi-generational accumulation of how to be a human being in a world that requires it. The butterfly carries all of this and knows none of it, and flies anyway. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi wrote elsewhere in the Zhuangzi about the man who was so at home in the ocean that the fish wondered what he was doing there and who thought nothing of it. The capacity to be at home in the element that others find alien. This is the Taoist understanding of genuine attunement. Not the effortful fitting of the self into a context, but the dissolution of the sense that the context is foreign. The Polynesian tradition holds this attunement in its most physical and most beautiful form. The navigator who is so genuinely calibrated to the ocean that the ocean is not an environment they are moving through, but something more like a second self. The navigator reads the swell, the stars, the color of the water, the behavior of the birds, not as external signals requiring interpretation, but as direct expressions of a knowing that the navigator and the ocean have, between them, arrived at through the long relationship. The butterfly does not navigate the air. It is in the air the way the navigator is in the ocean, not traveling through something foreign, but expressing what the relationship between the butterfly's nature and the air's nature makes possible. The flying is not the butterfly's achievement. It is the achievement of the relationship between what the butterfly is and what the air is, meeting in the specific way that produces flight. This is the Taoist teaching about how to be in the world, not as a self navigating a foreign environment, but as a self and world that are, at the deepest level, participating in the same nature. The Tao does not need to be navigated. It needs to be trusted, the way the navigator trusts the ocean, the way the butterfly trusts the air. There was once a navigator who had been so long at sea that the ocean had become his reference point, and the land seemed, on his returns, to be the strange and foreign thing. He had gone to sea young and had spent the great majority of his life on it. He was a man of genuine skill, the kind of navigator who knew the ocean in the way that the best practitioners of any art know their material, not as external facts to be applied, but as a living relationship that had been built up over decades of genuine engagement. He did not navigate from charts and instruments. He navigated from what the ocean was telling him, continuously, in the vocabulary that the ocean speaks and that only the long relationship teaches. He had come to shore for a period. A family matter required his presence on land for several months. He settled in and managed well enough. He loved his family. He was glad to be with them, but there was something he noticed very quietly that he could not quite account for, a sense of mild disorientation that the land produced in him that the ocean never did. On the ocean, he always knew where he was, not in the sense of being able to name his coordinates. He knew those too, but in a deeper sense, a sense of orientation, of being in relationship with the larger context in a way that was immediate and constant. The ocean spoke. He listened. He always knew where he was. On the land, this immediate relationship was absent. The land did not speak to him in the same way. He was on it, not in it, an observer rather than a participant. And the mild disorientation of this, the sense of being a guest in a world that had not yet extended its vocabulary to include him, sat with him through the months. An elder of his family, a man who had himself been a sailor in his youth, but who had come to shore and stayed, noticed this and came to sit with him one evening. "You are not quite here," the elder said. He did not say it as a criticism. "I know," the navigator said. "I cannot explain it." "I can," the elder said. He was quiet for a moment. "You have been in a relationship for so long that the relationship has become your natural state. When you are on the ocean, you are not on the ocean the way a passenger is on a ship. You are in dialogue with the ocean. It is telling you things constantly, and you are receiving them, and the receiving and the responding constitute a state that you have been in for so long that you have come to experience it as simply being present." He paused. "The land does not speak to you this way yet. The land requires a different relationship, built through different kinds of attention over time. You are new to the land in the way that a young sailor is new to the sea, present on it, but not yet in conversation with it." He looked at the navigator. "This is not a permanent condition. The land will begin to speak if you listen in the right way, but the listening is different, and you are not yet fluent." The navigator thought about this. "In the dream last night," he said, "I was on the ocean." He said it simply. "In the dream I was exactly where I always am, in the right element, knowing where I was." The elder smiled. "Yes," he said, "the dreaming takes you where your nature lives most fully. This is what dreams are, in part, the return to the conversation that is most genuinely yours." He paused. The ocean navigator in the land and the land person who dreams of mountains, both are the butterfly in the man's life, the element in which you are most completely yourself. The dreaming finds it even when the waking life has temporarily left it behind. Polynesian wayfinding tradition holds the understanding that the navigator's relationship with the ocean is not a relationship of a subject using an object. It is a mutual relationship, an ongoing conversation between the navigator's learned attentiveness and the ocean's continuous expressiveness. The ocean is always speaking. The navigator's gift is the specific calibration of attention that allows the speaking to be heard. The concept of hokulea, the star path, the navigational understanding of the sky as a living map, is not about the sky as a fixed external reference. It is about the relationship between the navigator's position and the sky's position, continuously recalibrating, always mutual. The navigator and the star path are in conversation. This is why the navigator who has lost the conversation, who is navigating from fixed charts alone without the living relationship, has lost something essential that no amount of accurate charting can restore. There is also in Polynesian tradition the understanding of mana as something accumulated through genuine relationship, not personal achievement, but the specific quality that builds through the long conversation between a person and their calling. The navigator of great mana is not the navigator with the most skill, exactly. It is the navigator whose relationship with the ocean is most genuinely mutual, who has given the most genuine attention over the most time and received the most genuinely in return. The butterfly and the air in long relationship, producing flight that is neither one's alone. Think about the element you are most genuinely in conversation with, the context or the practice or the relationship in which you are most fully present in the specific way the navigator is present on the ocean. Not the activity you are most skilled at necessarily. The activity in which the sense of being a self navigating something foreign is replaced by the sense of being in genuine dialogue with something that knows you, that speaks to you in a vocabulary you have spent years learning, that receives your engagement and responds to it in ways that the long relationship has made legible. This is the specific quality of being genuinely in your element. Not comfort exactly. The ocean is not comfortable. The conversation is the living relationship, the ongoing mutual exchange, the sense that you and what you are engaged with have developed a genuine understanding of each other. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of the work, or the relationship or the practice that you return to from a period away and find immediately available, where the conversation resumes from where it was left, without a warm-up period, as though the relationship was simply waiting. The element recognizes you. You recognize the element, the navigator and the ocean. Right now, in this breath, you are in your element in the most fundamental sense. You are a conscious being in a body on this earth, in the dark, in the quiet, in the specific conversation that consciousness and night have been having with each other since the first person lay down to sleep and looked at the stars and wondered. The butterfly is in the air. The navigator is on the ocean. You are here, in the night, in exactly the right element. The conversation has been going on for a very long time, and tonight it continues. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi did not only ask whether he was the butterfly or the man, he also noted that there must be a transition between the two, what he called hua, transformation, the movement that carries you from one state to another. This transition is not nothing. It is the Tao itself in its most direct expression. The perpetual, thoroughgoing changefulness of all things, the movement that is more fundamental than any of the things it is moving through. The Aboriginal Australian tradition holds this understanding in its deepest form in the concept of the Chukurpa, the dreaming, the living law that underlies and sustains the visible world. The dreaming is not a time in the past. It is the dimension of the eternal, co-present with the present moment, in which the patterns of what things are and how things become what they are were established and are continuously maintained. The butterfly emerging from the caterpillar is a Chukurpa event, not only this specific butterfly at this specific moment, but the pattern of butterfly becoming that is always happening. That is the butterfly's truth. The dreaming in which Zhuangzi was the butterfly is, in this understanding, not only Zhuangzi's personal experience, it is a Chukurpa event, a moment in which the pattern of transformation, the movement between states, the hua that is always happening, became directly perceptible to him. The uncertainty on waking is not confusion. It is accurate perception of what is actually the case, that the transition between one state and another is always happening to everything, and that the fixed self is always the dream within the larger reality of the Chukurpa. There was once a young person who entered the dreaming during ceremony and could not afterwards say with certainty whether they had returned from it or whether what had returned was a version of themselves that included what the dreaming had always been. They were young enough that the ceremony was one of their first, not their first, but close enough to the beginning, that the fullness of what could happen in the ceremony was still somewhat theoretical. They knew the teaching. They had been prepared carefully by elders who took the preparation seriously. But knowing the teaching and entering the experience are not the same thing, and they had entered. The ceremony began in the ordinary way, the gathering, the singing, the specific preparations that aligned the participants with the dreaming that the ceremony addressed. And for some period, the young person was fully present in the ordinary way, aware of themselves as a participant, aware of the others, tracking the ceremony with the attention they had been taught to bring. And then, without a perceptible transition, they were somewhere else, not a different physical location. They were still in the ceremonial space, but the ceremonial space had become the dreaming space, and the two spaces were the same space, and the beings and presences that the dreaming spoke of were present in the ceremony in a way that was not metaphorical or symbolic, but direct. They were there for what felt, from the inside, like a long time. They could not have said afterward how long the ceremony lasted. When they came back, or when the ceremony returned to the ordinary register, they sat very still for a long time, not upset, something more like taking stock, trying to find the edges of what had just happened. They went to an elder afterward, when there was a quiet moment. "I'm not sure I completely came back," they said. The elder looked at them with recognition rather than concern. "What part of you didn't come back?" the elder asked. They thought carefully. "The part that thought the dreaming was somewhere else," they said slowly. "That thought it was somewhere you went to and came back from." "Yes," the elder said. They sat with the young person for a moment. "The dreaming is not somewhere you go," the elder said. "The ceremony opens your perception to what is always already here. What you perceive in the ceremony is not a different world. It is this world, seen with different eyes." They paused. "The part of you that thought you were going somewhere is the part that didn't come back, because it was never right." They looked at the young person. "What came back is more complete than what went in. Not because you gained something, because you lost a misunderstanding." The young person sat with this. "The butterfly," they said finally. The elder looked at them, curious. "Someone told me once about a philosopher who dreamed he was a butterfly," the young person said, and woke not sure which he was. Yes, the elder said. The misunderstanding he lost, the young person said, was the one that said there was a clear line between them. The elder smiled. The dreaming has been teaching this since before any philosopher, the elder said. The line is not where we think it is. It was never where we thought it was. What the ceremony opens, what the vision gives, what the genuine dreaming shows, is the world as it actually is, without the line. They paused. This is not a frightening thing to know. It is the most settling thing you will ever know. The ground is more solid and wider and more deeply yours than the line suggested. Aboriginal Australian knowledge traditions hold the concept of Ngurakurlu, the belonging to country, the deep connection between a person and the specific land whose songlines they are responsible for carrying, as something that does not distinguish between the person in the waking state and the person in the dreaming state. Both belong to the country. Both participate in the chukurpa. The dreaming is not a place the person goes. It is the dimension that the person always already inhabits, made more directly perceptible in ceremony or in genuine dreaming. The songlines, the tracks of the ancestor being's movements through the land that established its features and its law, are simultaneously geographical routes through the physical country and routes through the dreaming. To walk a songline in the physical country is also to walk it in the dreaming. The person singing the song of the country is the person the song is singing through. The boundary between these two is not fixed. It is the teaching. There is also in Aboriginal Australian tradition the understanding that genuine sleep, the deep sleep of a body genuinely at rest, is the nightly return to the dreaming, the regular renewal of the connection between the individual and the larger pattern that the individual is always an expression of. The rest of genuine sleep is not only the rest of the body, it is the reconnection of the person to the chukurpa, the return to the dimension in which the being of things is continuously maintained and renewed. Think about the understanding you have lost on your way to somewhere genuinely larger. The misunderstandings that felt, when they were released, not like losing something, but like clearing something. The limits you had placed on what you were that turned out to be limits rather than definitions. The wall between yourself and something else that dissolved when you got close enough to see it clearly. In all of these, what came back was more complete than what went in, not because something was added, but because something was released. The misunderstanding let go. The boundary dissolved. The line moved to where it actually was, rather than where it had been assumed to be. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of a genuine change of perspective, not the minor updating of an existing view, but the kind of change where you look back at who you were before it and cannot quite find your way back into that person's certainty. The change has not taken something from you. It has given you a wider ground to stand on. The butterfly has emerged. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of a realization that reorganized what you thought you knew about a relationship, about yourself, about what you are doing here, and how the reorganization, though sometimes uncomfortable, left you with more rather than less, more ground, more room, more genuine access to the actual situation, which had always been larger than the previous understanding allowed. Right now, in this breath, the ground is wider than you know. The Chukopa is not somewhere you are going. It is the dimension that this moment, this specific, ordinary, unremarkable moment of lying in the dark, is already inside. The dreaming is not later. The butterfly is not later. Both are here in the specific quality of what is happening right now, in the softening of the day's hard edges, in the breath moving in the body without your asking it to. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi's butterfly dream arrives in the Zhuangzi without commentary, without conclusion, without a teacher or a student to frame it. It stands alone, in the text, with the barest possible context. Here is what happened. Here is the question. And then, nothing. The chapter ends. Zhuangzi moves on to the next teaching without resolving the one he has just offered. This formal decision is itself the teaching. The philosopher who could have resolved the question chose not to. The teacher who had, presumably, an opinion chose to withhold it. The text that frames one of the most discussed passages in the whole of Chinese philosophy offers the reader nothing. No answer, no preferred interpretation, only the experience held open. The Mayan tradition holds a form of this in its understanding of the calendar as a living system of questions rather than a fixed system of answers. Each day in the sacred calendar is not a fact, it is a quality, a particular confluence of energies and patterns that asks something of the person living in it, rather than telling them what will happen. The calendar keeper's role is not to predict, it is to attune, to feel the quality of the day, and to help the community live in dialogue with that quality, rather than against it or in ignorance of it. The butterfly dream is a day in the calendar of Zhuangzi's inner life, not a fact about the nature of reality, a quality, an experience of a specific kind, something to be attuned to, lived with, held open. The question is not what it means, the question is what it asks of you. There was once a young calendar keeper who had been told by her teacher that the sacred calendar was a living question, and who spent many years discovering what this meant. She had come to the keeping with the expectation that the calendar was a system of knowledge, that learning it would give her access to a fixed body of understanding that she could then apply to the questions people brought her. This was reasonable. The calendar was, among other things, a structured system. It had internal logic. It could be learned, and she had learned it carefully and thoroughly over the years of her apprenticeship. But her teacher, an old man of long practice and considerable patience, had said something at the beginning of her apprenticeship that she had not fully understood then, and that she found herself returning to repeatedly in the years that followed. The calendar is a living question, he had said, not a set of answers dressed in numbers. She had filed this as a teacher's poetic flourish and proceeded to learn the answers. The calendar had many. She learned them, each day's sign and its meaning, each combination and its implication, each cycle and its significance. She was, by any practical measure, a competent keeper after some years. People came to her with questions, and she was able to respond thoughtfully and accurately. But there was something she noticed over time. The most useful responses she gave were not the ones that drew on the stored knowledge of the calendar. They were the responses that arose when she was genuinely listening, not to her stored knowledge, but to the particular quality of what the person in front of her was carrying, in the particular quality of the day's energy, and to the space between those two things. She went to her teacher with this observation. "I am finding," she said, "that the times I am most useful are the times I am not using what I know." He looked at her with the expression she had learned to recognize as genuine pleasure. "Yes," he said, "now you are beginning to understand." "The calendar is a living question," she said. "Yes," he said, "and a living question is not answered by stored answers. It is answered by fresh contact with the quality of this moment, this person, this day." He looked at her. "The calendar gives you the vocabulary. The vocabulary allows you to perceive what you could not perceive without it. But the perceiving is not the vocabulary. It is what happens when the vocabulary is fully internalized and you are no longer using it consciously." He paused. "You do not navigate by thinking about the stars. You navigate by knowing the stars so thoroughly that they speak to you directly without the mediation of the thinking." He looked at her. "The calendar keeper of genuine depth does not look up the answer. They are inside the question, which is the day, which is always new." She carried this for many more years, and in those years she began to understand her teacher's original saying from the inside. The calendar was a living question because each day was genuinely new, genuinely unrepeated, genuinely holding something that had not been held in quite this way before. The stored knowledge was the map, but the territory was always arriving fresh, and the keeper who could hold both, the map and the fresh arrival, the stored knowledge and the living question, was the keeper who could serve the community in the way the calendar was designed to be served. "Like the butterfly," she said once, near the end of her years of keeping, to a young apprentice who had just begun. "What?" the apprentice said. "The philosopher who did not know if he was the butterfly or the man," she said. "The calendar is the question between them. Every day is the question between them. Not, what does this day mean, but what is this day asking of this specific person, right now, in this unrepeated moment?" She looked at the apprentice. "This is why the answer cannot be stored. The question is always new." Mayan calendar traditions hold that Tzolk'in, the sacred 260-day calendar, as a living system in which each of the 260 unique day signs represents not a fixed meaning, but a quality of engagement, a specific kind of attention that the day asks the person to bring. The Ajkij, the daykeeper, does not predict what will happen on a given day. They attune to the quality of the day's energy and help the person understand how to move in relation to that quality. This is a fundamentally different relationship with knowledge than the prediction model. The prediction model treats the calendar as a source of fixed answers. The attunement model treats it as a living question, the question of what this specific quality in this specific person's life at this specific moment is asking for and offering. The butterfly dream, in this frame, is not an experience that has a correct interpretation. It is an experience that asks something. The correct response is not to answer. It is to hear the question. There is also in Mayan tradition the concept of inlakech. I am another you, the greeting that acknowledges the fundamental identity between self and other, the permeable boundary between what I am and what you are. The butterfly and the man, the question between them is not which is real, but how they are related, what each recognizes in the other, what one is for the other, how the boundary between them is less a wall than a mirror. Think about the questions in your life that have not resolved into answers and that you are still living inside. Not the unresolved problems, the genuine open questions, the questions that have not closed because they are not the kind of questions that close. The questions about what you are for, about what matters, about who you are in the deep sense rather than the biographical sense. The questions you carry year after year, not as burdens but as companions, as the specific quality of your engagement with the permanent uncertainty of being alive. The butterfly dream is this kind of question. It does not close. You do not arrive at the answer to which one is real. You carry the question, and the carrying of it changes what you see, not because the question teaches you something, because the holding of the question open keeps you in the specific quality of attention that open questions produce, the attentiveness, the receptivity, the willingness to receive what the day is actually offering rather than what you expected the day to offer. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific quality of the person who is genuinely curious about their own experience, who is living inside the question of what this is and who is doing it, versus the person who has decided what their experience means and is collecting evidence for the conclusion. The first person is always surprised. The second person is mostly confirmed. The first person's life is, in this specific sense, more alive. Right now, in this breath, you do not need to know which one you are, the butterfly or the man, the dreamer or the dream. The question is here with you, open, in the dark. And the open question, held lightly, without urgency, without demand for resolution. This is the specific quality of the threshold, the specific quality of this moment. The butterfly already somewhere in the forming, the question already teaching. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Zhuangzi wrote about the sage who knows without knowing how they know, who acts without the deliberate intention that ordinary action requires, who moves through the world with the specific quality of the butterfly in flight, not performing, not efforting, simply expressing what it is, completely, in this moment, in this air, in this light. This is the final form of the teaching from the butterfly dream, not the philosophical question about which state is real, not the meditation on the nature of identity and transformation, but the practical consequence. What does it look like to live as the butterfly lives? not in the sense of ignoring the world's practical demands, but in the sense of moving through those demands with the specific quality of the butterfly's flight, complete, immediate, unmonitored, the self and the action and the world all participating in the same movement. The Norse tradition holds a glimpse of this in the concept of skald, the poet-singer whose role is not to compose but to receive, and in the specific understanding of poetic inspiration as something that arrives through the practitioner rather than from them. The skald does not make the poem makes itself through the skald. And the skald who has understood this, who has stopped trying to make and started trying to receive, is the skald of greatest power. Tonight's final teaching is the first one made practical. You are the butterfly right now, not metaphorically, in the most direct sense, the self that is present in this moment, this breath, this dark, is not the managed, constructed, carefully assembled self of the waking day. It is something closer to the butterfly, the awareness before the architecture, the presence before the performance. And from this presence, rest is not an achievement. It is simply what is. There was once a skald who, in the composing of a very old form of verse, found the poem arriving rather than being made, and could not say afterward whether he had composed it or been used by it. He had been composing for most of his adult life, not the ordinary verse that anyone could produce with enough cleverness and enough attention to form. The deepest forms, the forms that required the specific mastery of meter and imagery, and the old knowledge that the skald tradition carried, the forms that demanded so complete a command of the tools that the tools could become transparent in the hands of the most practiced. He had reached this point. He knew it, not with pride, but with the recognition of a craftsman who has been at a thing long enough to know what genuine mastery looks and feels like, and can see that he has arrived somewhere close to it. The forms were his. The words came when he called them. He could produce, reliably, verse of genuine quality. But there was a specific category of composition that he had been circling for years, the oldest forms, the ones associated with the deepest sources of the tradition, the forms that the greatest of the old skalds were said to have produced in specific conditions. Not the deliberate production of a craftsman, but the reception of something larger than any craftsman's skill. He had been working on a particular poem in one of these forms for several months, working in the ordinary sense, deliberating over each word, testing each construction against the others, building toward a whole that he could see in outline but could not quite reach in execution. The poem was good. It was not what it was trying to be. And then one evening, sitting with the poem and not, for a change, trying to do anything to it, simply sitting with it in the condition of weariness that is the specific quality of having tried for a long time. Something changed. He reached for the next word, and the word was there in a way it had not been. Not chosen, present. He wrote it down and reached for the next, and it was also there. He wrote it down. He did not know, as he was writing, whether the poem he was producing was the poem he had been working on or a different poem entirely, or whether any distinction between those two things was meaningful. He was inside something, and the inside was not a confusion. It was the clearest he had been in months. He came out of it, though came out was not quite right, since there was nothing to come out of. There was simply the transition from inside to outside, like Zhuangzi waking from the butterfly, and looked at what was on the page. It was the poem. Not the poem he had been building, the poem he had been reaching toward through the building, completed. An older skald, a man who had been in the tradition for longer than he had, came to him some days later, and he described what had happened. The poem arrived, the older man said. He said it simply, without drama. This is what poems do when the skald has prepared correctly and then gotten out of the way. I didn't get out of the way deliberately, the younger man said. I was too tired to try any more. Yes, the older man said, this is the most reliable way. He looked at the younger man. The trying is necessary. You need to know the forms completely before the forms can use you rather than the other way around. The months of work were not wasted. They were the preparation. He paused. But the poem itself, the living poem, the poem that is more than the sum of its construction, this arrives when the skald has prepared so completely that there is nothing left to prepare, and in the exhaustion of the preparation, the resistance drops, and the thing that was always going to arrive through you finally can. He looked at the younger man. You are not the source of the poem. You are the skald. The source is older than you. It used your skill, your accumulated years, your specific voice. But the life in the poem, the thing that makes it more than competent verse, that came from somewhere that was not you. He paused, which is not to say it is not yours. The butterfly is Zhuangzi's, the poem is yours. But both arrive from somewhere that the thinking self did not make. The younger skald sat with this for a long time. Who was composing? He asked finally. Not as a metaphysical question, as a genuine question about the experience. The older man smiled. That, he said, is exactly the question Zhuangzi was asking. And he did not answer it either, because the right response to that question is not an answer. It is gratitude. Norse tradition holds the understanding that the skald's art draws from the mead of poetry, the sacred mead that was fashioned from the blood of the wisest being and that gives the drinker the capacity to compose. The skald who has genuinely received from this source is not the cleverest craftsman, but the one who has become sufficiently transparent that the source can express through them. Odin's theft of the mead, his transformation into a serpent, his passage through stone, his flight back as an eagle, is not primarily a story about cunning. It is a story about the lengths to which the divine must go to establish the channel through which genuine art can flow into the world. The skald of genuine power is the channel, not the source. The poem that is most fully alive is the poem in which the skald's skill has become so thoroughly internalized that it has become transparent, in which the construction is invisible, and what is visible is only the thing the construction was trying to let through. The butterfly flying, not the butterfly thinking about flying. There is also in Norse tradition the concept of word, fate, the woven fabric of what is, the pattern that runs beneath and through all events, as something that is not opposed to individual agency, but is expressed through it. The skald whose poem arrives is not bypassing their will. Their will, at its most genuine, is the will to be the best possible channel for what wants to come through. The word expresses through the willing, the way the stream expresses through the channel, the way the flight expresses through the butterfly's wings. Not against the nature of the wings, through it, because of it, the two together producing what neither could produce alone. Think about the moments in your own life when something that was genuinely yours arrived through you rather than from you. The words you found for someone who was suffering that you had not planned and could not have planned. The understanding that arose in you during a difficult conversation that you had not had when you went in. The quality of presence you brought to a moment that required it, that was more than you thought you had available, that arrived in the needing rather than in the preparation for the needing. In all of these, something moved through the channel that the channel alone could not have made. Not magic. The channel was necessary, the preparation was necessary, the skill and the attention and the accumulated years were all necessary. But they were the conditions for the arrival, not the arrival itself. The butterfly does not make itself. The butterfly arrives through the specific conditions that butterfly becoming requires. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific quality of genuine generosity. The generosity that is not managed or rationed, but that simply arises in response to genuine need. And how different it feels from the generosity that is decided in advance. The first kind does not cost in the same way. It moves through you rather than from you. And after it you feel not depleted, but clarified, as if the movement of something real through the channel had scoured it slightly, made it slightly more itself. You may have felt this yourself in the experience of being at your best in a moment that required your best, where the best arrived not because you summoned it, but because the moment asked for it, and the channel was open, and how different that felt from the moments where you were trying to be your best and managing a fall short. The butterfly is not trying to fly, it is flying. The difference is not in the wings, it is in the presence or absence of the trying. Right now, in this breath, the trying is very quiet. The day's effort has subsided. The channel that you are is resting, and in the rest, in the specific quality of the open, undemanding, unconstrued awareness that is what you are when you are not being managed, something can move through that the managed self prevents. You are the channel for this night, this breath, this dark. The butterfly is forming in the air. And in the morning you will be, in some small way, more completely what you always were. The transition having happened through you. The poem having arrived. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Tonight we began with one of the most quietly subversive questions in the whole of human thought. Zhuangzi fell asleep. He became a butterfly, completely, without remainder, with no residual philosopher watching from behind the wings. He woke, and sitting with the morning and the memory of the flying, he noticed something he could not resolve. He could not find the seam between the two. He could not locate the place where the butterfly ended and the man began. And instead of reaching for an answer, he simply held the question and moved on. We sat with a young dervish who could not find the edge between himself and his prayer, and who discovered in his teacher's garden that the edge dissolving was not the problem, it was the arrival. We travelled with a young woman who went on a vision quest and came back uncertain which was more real, the sitting or the somewhere she went while sitting, and who learned from her elder that the coming back was more complete than the going in, precisely because something had been released that was never right to hold. We watched a student of philosophy find the soldier's fear still in him on waking, and discover, with his teacher's help, that both the soldier and the philosopher were genuine expressions of the same awareness, and neither the final one. We accompanied a pilgrim who dreamed of the sacred mountain before she had woken there, and who found, when she arrived in her waking life, that something in her already knew the silence. We sat with a monk who discovered, in the complete giving of his attention in the presence of the dying, that the attention had no owner, that it was the awareness itself, moving through the specific instrument of his presence, producing something neither he alone nor the dying alone could have produced. We listened as a young man dreamed of the ungoverned version of himself and discovered that the governing had been a covering, and that what was underneath the covering was not less, but more genuinely him. We watched a student discover that she could not catch the moment of falling asleep because the catching prevented the moment, and that the awareness which was present on both sides of the transition was something other than the watcher, something that did not dissolve, something that was already there before the watcher arrived. We sat with a storyteller who, deep in the telling of the oldest story, found the storytelling itself through her, and came back uncertain whether she had been the bard or the vessel, and was told by her elder that both were true, and that the vessel was not less but more fully the bard for having been used this way. We accompanied a community member who dreamed of the ancestor and could not say whether she had been visited or had briefly become the ancestor's knowing, and who learned that the accumulated wisdom of the family's long engagement with the world was always already present in her, needing only the specific conditions of the dreaming to become audible. We travelled with a navigator for whom the ocean had become the reference point, and the land seemed the dream, and who discovered in his dreaming the conversation that the land had temporarily replaced. We walked with a young person who entered the dreaming and came back uncertain whether they had returned, and who learned from an elder that what did not come back was the misunderstanding that there was a sharp line to cross. We sat with a calendar keeper who spent many years learning that the calendar was a living question rather than a stored answer, and that the deepest keeping was the capacity to be inside the question of each new day without needing to have answered it in advance. And we listened as a young scout discovered that the poem of greatest power arrived when the trying stopped and the channel opened, and that the poem was his entirely, precisely because it had come through him rather than from him. Across all of these, the butterfly's question was the same. Where is the line between the man and the butterfly? Between waking and dreaming, between the self that acts and the action the self is performing, between the one who gives and what is given, between the person and the ancestor, the navigator and the ocean, the skald and the poem. The line is there, functionally, practically, in the ordinary conduct of the life. And it is not where we think it is, not as fixed, not as solid, not as unambiguously placed as the waking mind insists. This is not a frightening thing to know. It is one of the most settling. The self is not a fragile container that must be protected from contamination by everything outside it. The self is a process, a river, not a vessel, that is continuously in exchange with everything it is in relationship with, and continuously becoming something slightly different from what it was yesterday, and continuously more alive in the moments when the exchange is most genuinely open. The butterfly does not protect itself from the air. The air and the butterfly are, together, what flight is. And you, in this moment, are not separate from this night and this dark and this breath. You are the question between the butterfly and the man. And the question, resting here in the dark, requires no answer. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. If one moment stayed with you, the dervish finding no edge in the prayer, the navigator on the ocean that was home, the skald finding the poem already arrived, let that be enough. Wherever you are right now, you are welcome here, exactly as you are. Not the managed self, not the performed self, not the self that knows its own name and has its situation in hand, but the butterfly you are underneath all of that, flying in the dark without knowing you are flying. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night.